The healing begins the moment you stop waiting for an apology. Carl Jung. The healing begins the moment you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. These words pierce through the veil of our deepest wounds, don't they? They land in that sacred space where truth meets pain, where wisdom intersects with our most tender vulnerabilities. Welcome to a journey that Carl Gustav Jung himself would recognize, a descent into the depths of your own psyche, where healing doesn't come from others, but emerges from the profound act of reclaiming your own wholeness. Today we explore one of the most liberating yet challenging truths in all of depth psychology, that your healing cannot wait for someone else's recognition, remorse or redemption. It begins in the sacred solitude of your own soul, in that moment when you finally understand that you hold the key to your own freedom. Jung once wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. This awakening, this turning inward, is where true healing begins." How long have you been waiting? How many sunrises have you witnessed while carrying the weight of someone else's actions? How many nights have you spent rehearsing conversations that will never happen, imagining apologies that will never come? The human psyche has a profound capacity for hope, but it also has an equally profound capacity for self-imprisonment. We create invisible chains forged from expectation, binding ourselves to people who have already moved on, to moments that can never be reclaimed, to words that will never be spoken. Jung understood this peculiar form of suffering. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what happens when we remain perpetually irritated, perpetually waiting for external validation of our pain? We become what Jung called unconscious, living not in the present moment of our own experience, but in the phantom realm of what should have been, what could have been, what we desperately need to have been. The mother who never acknowledged her cruelty. The father who never recognized his absence. The friend who betrayed without ever looking back. The lover who left without explanation. The colleague who took credit without conscience. The institution that failed without accountability. Each of these experiences creates what Jung termed a complex, an emotionally charged cluster of thoughts, feelings, and memories that operate somewhat independently of our conscious will. These complexes can dominate our psychological landscape for years, even decades, keeping us trapped in patterns of waiting, hoping, and suffering. But why do we wait? What is it about an apology that we believe will set us free? Jung's analytical psychology reveals that we often seek apologies not just for the original wound, but for the restoration of our sense of justice, order, and meaning in the world. When someone hurts us without acknowledgement, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a fundamental disruption in our understanding of how the world should work. We believe, perhaps unconsciously, that an apology will validate our experience and confirm that we weren't imagining our pain, restore our sense of worth and dignity, provide closure to an emotional chapter that feels forever unfinished, return power to us that we feel was stolen, prove that there is justice and accountability in human relationships. But Jung discovered something profound in his decades of analytical work. The very act of waiting for external validation keeps us in a state of psychological dependence. We remain, in essence, children waiting for the adult world to make things right. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, Jung wrote. But how can we become who we truly are if we're constantly looking backward, constantly seeking permission from our past to step into our future? The cruel irony is that the longer we wait for an apology, the more power we give to the very person or situation that hurt us. We become what Jung called identified with our wound, defining ourselves not by our inherent wholeness, but by our injury. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial to our understanding. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, represents the parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge or integrate, and one of the most difficult shadows to face is what we might call the victim shadow. Now, let me be clear. Acknowledging that you have been genuinely hurt, betrayed, or wronged is not victimhood, it's truth. The victim shadow emerges when we unconsciously choose to remain defined by that hurt, when we make our wound our identity rather than part of our story. Jung observed that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness here is not the original wound. That pain deserves acknowledgement and compassion. The darkness is our unconscious attachment to that wound, our secret investment in remaining hurt. Sometimes, if we're brutally honest with ourselves, we discover that we've been waiting for an apology, not because we need it for healing, but because we've grown comfortable in the familiar landscape of our grievance. The wound has become our home, our identity, our excuse for not fully engaging with life. This realization can be devastating. It requires us to confront the possibility that we have participated, however unconsciously, in our own continued suffering. It demands that we face what Jung called the terrible truth, that we have more power than we've been willing to claim. But this confrontation with our own power is also the doorway to freedom. Because the moment we recognize that we've been choosing to wait, we also recognize that we can choose to stop waiting. Jung was deeply fascinated by alchemy, not as a literal practice of turning lead into gold, but as a metaphor for psychological transformation. The alchemist spoke of the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, which in psychological terms means the work of consciousness against the natural tendency toward unconsciousness. Healing without an apology is alchemical work. It requires us to transmute the lead of our resentment into the gold of wisdom, to transform the poison of betrayal into the medicine of compassion, to turn the darkness of abandonment into the light of self-reliance. This process begins with what Jung called active imagination, the conscious engagement with the unconscious contents of our psyche. Instead of waiting for someone else to heal us, we begin an inner dialogue with our wound. We might ask, what did this experience teach me about boundaries? What did it reveal about my own capacity for resilience? How did it deepen my empathy for others who have been hurt? What strengths did I discover in myself that I might never have found otherwise? Jung wrote, "The wounded healer is the archetype of the self in its function of individuation." This means that our wounds, when consciously integrated, become the very source of our ability to heal not only ourselves but others. The person who betrayed you may never understand the depth of your pain, but you can understand it. You can hold space for it, honor it, learn from it, and ultimately transform it. You can become what Jung called a twice-born person, someone who has died to their old way of being and been reborn through conscious suffering. This is not about forgiveness, at least not initially. Forgiveness may come later, but it cannot be forced or manufactured. This is about reclaiming your own psychological autonomy, your right to heal on your own terms, in your own time, through your own inner work. Jung's greatest contribution to psychology was his understanding of what he called individuation, the process by which we become who we are meant to be, distinct from both our environment and our unconscious identification with others. Waiting for an apology keeps us in what Jung termed a state of participation mystique, an unconscious psychological fusion with another person. We cannot individuate, cannot become fully ourselves, while we remain psychologically dependent on someone else's acknowledgement or approval. The individuation process requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold, paradox, to exist in the tension between opposites without collapsing into one side or the other. In the context of healing without an apology, this means holding both the reality of your pain and the possibility of your wholeness, both the truth of what was done to you and the truth of what you can do for yourself. Jung observed that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This acceptance includes accepting that you were hurt, accepting that the apology may never come, accepting that you have the power to heal anyway, and accepting that this power has been within you all along. This is terrifying because it means taking full responsibility for your emotional and spiritual well-being. It means stepping out of the familiar role of the wounded one waiting for rescue and into the unknown territory of the self-healer, the one who saves themselves. But Jung also wrote, "Where your fear is, there is your task. Your task is not to Wait for someone else to validate your pain. Your task is to become so whole, so integrated, so authentically yourself, that external validation becomes unnecessary. Nice if it comes, but not required for your peace. At the deepest level, the journey of healing without an apology connects us to what Jung called the archetypal dimension of human experience. Archetypes are universal patterns of human experience that transcend individual biography and connect us to the collective wisdom of our species. The archetype that governs this particular journey is what we might call the self-redeemer, the part of the psyche that has the capacity to rescue itself from psychological imprisonment. This archetype appears in myths and stories across cultures: the phoenix rising from ashes, the hero rescuing themselves from the underworld, the prisoner who finds freedom through inner transformation rather than external release. When we stop waiting for an apology, we activate this archetypal energy within ourselves. We step into the mythic role of the one who breaks their own chains, who finds their own way out of the labyrinth, who becomes their own source of blessing and benediction. Jung wrote, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." In the context of healing, we might say, your task is not to seek for an apology, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against your own wholeness. These barriers might include the belief that you need external validation to be worthy of peace, the fear that letting go of your grievance means letting the other person off the hook, the unconscious attachment to the identity of being wronged, the terror of taking full responsibility for your own healing, the resistance to discovering how powerful you actually are. Each of these barriers, when brought to consciousness, begins to dissolve. Not through force or willpower, but through the gentle, persistent light of awareness. Resentment, Jung understood, is like a poison that we drink, hoping the other person will die. It is perhaps the most self-destructive emotion in the human repertoire because it keeps us perpetually connected to our wound, perpetually reliving our pain. But resentment also contains within it a seed of transformation. Jung believed that every psychological symptom, including resentment, contains a potential cure. The key is learning to read the symptom correctly, to understand what it's trying to tell us about our unconscious needs and desires. Resentment often masks a deeper longing, the longing to be seen, understood, valued, and respected. When we wait for an apology, we're really waiting for someone to see us clearly, to understand the impact of their actions, to value us enough to take responsibility. But here's the alchemical secret that Jung discovered. We can give ourselves what we're waiting for others to give us. We can see ourselves clearly, understand our own experience deeply, value ourselves enough to take responsibility for our own healing. This doesn't mean minimizing or dismissing our pain. It means becoming our own compassionate witness, our own wise counselor, our own loving advocate. It means developing what Jung called a relationship with the self, that transcendent center of our being that exists beyond all wounding and all healing. When we cultivate this relationship with our deepest self, something miraculous happens. The need for external apology begins to fade, not because we've suppressed it or denied it, but because we've found something infinitely more reliable and nourishing, our own unconditional presence with our own experience. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Who you truly are is not defined by what others have done to you, but by how you choose to respond, how you choose to grow, how you choose to love yourself through the process of becoming whole." There is a particular kind of courage required to heal without an apology, the courage to love yourself enough to stop abandoning yourself in service of waiting for someone else to rescue you. This courage is not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, persistent, daily. It's the courage to sit with your pain without immediately trying to fix it or escape it. It's the courage to feel your feelings fully without needing someone else to validate them. It's the courage to take exquisite care of yourself even when, especially when, no one else is offering to do so. Jung understood that true healing requires what he called voluntary suffering, the conscious choice to feel our pain fully rather than avoiding it, numbing, it or projecting it onto others. When we stop waiting for an apology, we're choosing to feel the full weight of our disappointment, our anger, our sadness, our grief. But we're also choosing to feel something else, our own strength, our own resilience, our own capacity for self-love and self-healing. We discover that we can hold our own pain with tenderness, that we can be our own source of comfort and understanding. This discovery is revolutionary. It means that we are not as helpless as we thought, not as dependent as we believed, not as broken as we feared. It means that we carry within us everything we need for healing. We just need the courage to access it. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." This choice, to become whole regardless of who apologizes or doesn't apologize, is the most radical act of self-love we can perform. It's radical because it goes against everything our wounded parts want to believe. Our wounded parts want to believe that healing depends on external circumstances, that peace requires other people's cooperation, that we cannot be whole until the world acknowledges our pain. But the deeper self knows better. The self knows that healing is an inside job, that peace is our natural state once we stop disturbing it with resentment and expectation, that wholeness is who we are beneath all the stories of brokenness. Jung pioneered a therapeutic technique called active imagination, the conscious dialogue with the unconscious parts of ourselves. When healing without an apology, this practice becomes essential. We must learn to speak to our wounded parts with the compassion we wish others had shown us. We must become the loving parent to our own inner child, the wise elder to our own confused younger self, the faithful friend to our own lonely heart. This might sound like, "I see how much you're hurting. I understand why you want that apology. I know it feels unfair that they get to move on while you're still in pain. And I want you to know that your pain matters, your experience is valid, and you deserve to heal whether they ever acknowledge what they did or not." It might sound like, "I'm not going to abandon you the way they did. I'm not going to minimize your experience or tell you to get over it. I'm going to stay with you through this healing process. I'm going to be the consistent, loving presence you needed then and need now." It might sound like, "You're not broken, you're not damaged goods, you're not defined by what was done to you. You are a sacred being having a human experience, and this experience, as painful as it is part of your journey toward greater wholeness and wisdom." Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." When we consciously meet our own wounded parts with love and presence, both our conscious self and our wounded self are transformed. The wounded part begins to feel safe, heard, and valued. The conscious self begins to feel empowered, compassionate, and whole. This inner meeting is the beginning of true healing, not healing that depends on external apology, but healing that arises from our own loving relationship with ourselves. Eventually, as we heal ourselves from the inside out, the question of forgiveness may arise. But Jung's understanding of forgiveness is quite different from the popular notion that we must forgive in order to be free. Jung believed that forgiveness cannot be manufactured or forced. It's not something we do as much as something that happens to us when we're truly ready. Premature forgiveness, forgiveness that comes from our head rather than our heart, often serves to suppress our pain rather than transform it. True forgiveness, in Jung's view, emerges naturally from the process of individuation. As we become more whole, more integrated, more truly ourselves, we find that we're naturally less reactive to the unconsciousness of others. We see their actions not as deliberate attacks on our worth, but as expressions of their own woundedness and unconsciousness. This doesn't excuse their behavior or minimize our pain. It simply means that we've grown large enough to hold both our own experience and theirs, without needing them to be different than they are in order for us to be at peace. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are unconsciously reflecting back to us our own disowned parts, our own capacity for selfishness, unconsciousness, or cruelty. This recognition can be humbling. It can soften our self-righteousness and open our hearts to our shared humanity. It can help us see that the person who hurt us is not a monster, but a wounded human being acting from their own pain and limitation. But this understanding comes only after we've done our own healing work, only after we've reclaimed our own power, only after we've learned to love ourselves unconditionally. It cannot be rushed or forced. It must emerge organically from our own inner transformation. As we heal without waiting for an apology, something unexpected begins to emerge. Authentic power. Not power over others, but power with ourselves. Not the power to control or manipulate, but the power to choose our response, to create our reality, to author our own story. Jung distinguished between what he called ego power and self-power. Ego power is reactive, defensive, and dependent on external circumstances. It's the power that comes from proving we're right, getting others to admit they're wrong, or forcing the world to conform to our expectations. Self-power, on the other hand, is creative, responsive, and independent of external circumstances. It's the power that comes from knowing who we are regardless of how others treat us, from acting in alignment with our deepest values, regardless of whether others appreciate or acknowledge our actions. When we stop waiting for an apology, we're choosing self-power over ego power. We're choosing to be the author of our own healing rather than the victim of someone else's unconsciousness. We're choosing to write a new chapter in our story rather than remaining stuck in the old one. This shift in power is palpable. Others can sense it. We walk differently, speak differently, relate differently. We're no longer coming from a place of need or desperation or resentment. We're coming from a place of wholeness, presence, and authentic strength. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you can look into your own heart." When we look into our own heart and find it healed, not because someone apologized, but because we chose to heal ourselves, our vision becomes crystal clear. We see that we were never as powerless as we thought, never as dependent as we believed, never as broken as we feared. We see that we are and have always been enough. Paradoxically, when we heal ourselves without waiting for others to heal us, we become a gift to others. We become what Jung called a wounded healer, someone whose own process of healing enables them to help others heal. People sense our authenticity, our strength, our peace. They're drawn to the quality of presence that comes from someone who has learned to be with their own pain without needing others to fix it. They recognize in us the possibility of their own healing. This is how healing spreads, not through preaching or teaching, but through being. When we embody the truth that healing is possible without apology, we give others permission to begin their own healing journey. We also, in many cases, create the conditions that make apology more likely. When we're no longer desperate for it, no longer demanding it, no longer making it a condition of our peace, others may feel safer to offer it. When we're no longer reactive and wounded, others may be more able to see us clearly and acknowledge their impact. But by then, the apology is no longer necessary for our healing. It becomes a gift rather than a requirement, a bonus rather than a necessity. We can receive it with gratitude if it comes, and remain at peace if it doesn't. Jung observed that the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. We might say that the greatest tragedy of human relationships is the unhealed wounds that get passed from person to person, generation to generation. When we heal ourselves, we break this chain. We refuse to pass our wound to the next person, the next relationship, the next generation. We become a place where the cycle of unconscious wounding stops and the possibility of conscious healing begins. As we near the end of this journey, it's important to understand that healing without an apology doesn't mean we become invulnerable or that we never get hurt again. It means we develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox, to be both human and divine, both wounded and whole, both individual and universal. We learn that wholeness doesn't mean the absence of wounds, but the integration of all parts of ourselves, wounded and healed, light and shadow, strong and vulnerable. We become what Jung called individuated, uniquely ourselves, while also deeply connected to the collective human experience. This integration brings a profound peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. It's not the peace of getting what we want, but the peace of accepting what is while maintaining our power to choose our response. Jung wrote, Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. This awakening, this recognition of our own wholeness, is the ultimate healing. It's the realization that we were never actually broken, just temporarily disconnected from our own deeper truth. We discover that beneath all the stories of wounding and healing, beneath all the narratives of betrayal and redemption, there exists a self that is eternally whole, eternally perfect, eternally at peace. This self has been waiting not for someone else's apology, but for our own recognition, our own acknowledgement, our own loving embrace. When we turn toward this self with complete acceptance and unconditional love, the healing is immediate and complete. We realize that we are not who we thought we were. We are so much more. In the end, healing without an apology brings us into what Jung called the eternal present, a state of being where we're neither haunted by the past nor anxious about the future, but fully alive in this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. From this place of presence, we see that the wound was never the whole story. It was just one chapter in the larger narrative of our becoming. It was the coal that under pressure became the diamond. It was the grain of sand that with time and patience became the pearl. Jung's final words on this matter might be these: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Who you truly are cannot be diminished by someone else's actions or enhanced by someone else's apologies. Who you truly are exists independent of all external validation or condemnation. You are the one you've been waiting for. You are the apology you need. You are the forgiveness you seek. You are the healing you desire. You are the love you long. For the healing begins the moment you stop waiting and start being who you truly are. As Jung himself said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The gold is in the dark, and we have no other choice but to go after it. Your gold is not in someone else's apology. Your gold is in your own depths, waiting for you to claim it. If this reflection spoke to your soul, if these words found their way to the wounded healer within you, know that you are not alone on this journey. Subscribe not to receive more content, but to join a community of souls committed to healing from the inside out, to becoming whole without waiting for permission, to discovering the gold that lies within their own depths. The journey is just beginning, and you have everything you need to complete it.